The morning sun streamed through the large windows of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport as John Miller made his way to Gate C-17. He walked with a slight limp, his right knee stiff from an old injury that bothered him more on cold mornings like this one. At 68 years old, the retired Marine Corps veteran had learned to live with the discomfort, a permanent reminder of his time serving his country. John arrived at the gate 45 minutes before boarding. He always came early for flights, a habit formed during his 25 years of military service. Better to be an hour early than a minute late, his first sergeant used to say. The waiting area was already filling with travelers headed to San Francisco on the 9:15 flight. He found an empty seat near the boarding desk and settled in, placing his worn leather carry-on bag between his feet. From his shirt pocket, he pulled out his reading glasses and the paperback Western novel he'd been working through for the past week. John didn't care much for cell phones or tablets. He preferred the feel of actual pages between his fingers. The navy blue cap on his head had USMC Veteran embroidered across the front in gold thread. It wasn't flashy, just a simple acknowledgement of his service. He rarely talked about his time in the Marines, but he wore the cap with quiet pride. His wife Elaine had given it to him before she passed away 3 years ago. As John read his book, the gate area grew more crowded. Business people in suits tapped away on laptops. Parents tried to keep energetic children entertained. College students with earbuds nodded to music only they could hear. The usual airport scene played out around him, but John remained focused on his book until the boarding announcement crackled over the speakers. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We will now begin boarding United Airlines Flight 2478 to San Francisco. We invite our active military personnel and veterans to board at this time. John closed his book, returned his reading glasses to his pocket, and stood up. His knee protested with a sharp twinge, but he ignored it. He joined the small line of current and former military members at the gate. The gate agent smiled as she scanned his boarding pass. "Thank you for your service, sir," she said, noticing his cap. John nodded with a small smile. "Thank you kindly." He made his way down the jet bridge, moving carefully to avoid bumping into others with his slight limp. Entering the aircraft, he nodded politely to the flight attendants who greeted passengers at the door. His seat was 17A, a window seat in economy class. John had specifically requested a window seat when booking his flight 3 months ago. He was traveling to San Francisco to visit his daughter Lisa and his 2 grandchildren. It would be his first time seeing them since Christmas, and he had packed small gifts for the kids in his checked luggage. John found his RAW and carefully stored his carry-on in the overhead bin. He settled into his seat with a small sigh of relief. The window seat was perfect. He could lean against the wall of the plane if his knee started bothering him, and he wouldn't have to get up every time someone needed to use the bathroom. Outside, the small oval window, ground crew members loaded luggage into the belly of the aircraft. John watched them work efficiently in their bright yellow vests. He had always appreciated people who took pride in their jobs, no matter what those jobs might be. The plane continued to fill as more passengers boarded. A young woman with a small child took the middle seat in his row, while a businessman in a crisp suit claimed the aisle seat. John smiled at them both, then returned his attention to the activity outside his window. The cabin grew louder as more people found their seats, stowed their belongings, and settled in for the 3.5-hour flight. Flight attendants moved up and down the aisles, helping passengers and checking that overhead bins were properly closed. John noticed one flight attendant in particular, a woman in her mid-40s with short brown hair and a kind face. Her name tag read Susan Carter. She moved with efficiency, helping an elderly woman stow her bag, then assisting a mother traveling alone with twin toddlers. Susan had the patient look of someone who genuinely enjoyed helping others. The captain's voice came over the intercom, welcoming everyone aboard and announcing an on-time departure. The safety demonstration began, and John watched respectfully. Though he had seen it hundreds of times over his years of travel, he knew the importance of safety procedures. As the demonstration ended and the plane prepared to push back from the gate, Susan Carter approached John's row. She leaned down slightly and spoke in a low, friendly voice. "Excuse me, sir. Are you Mr. Miller?" John looked up, slightly surprised. Yes, that's me. Susan smiled, but there was something apologetic in her expression. Mr. Miller, I hate to ask this of you, but would you mind moving from your current seat? We need to make a special accommodation. John furrowed his brow. He had specifically chosen this window seat months ago. At his age, with his bad knee, changing seats wasn't just an inconvenience. It could mean significant discomfort for the entire flight. I specifically booked this seat, he explained, trying to keep the disappointment from his voice. I have a bad knee from an old injury, and the window seat lets me position more comfortably. Susan nodded understandingly. I completely appreciate that, sir, and I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. I promise we'll make sure you're comfortable. John glanced around. The plane was nearly full now. Several passengers nearby had noticed the conversation and were watching with curious expressions. Some appeared annoyed at the potential delay, while others seemed concerned about the elderly veteran being asked to move. A young man across the aisle spoke up. He's a veteran. Can't someone else move? Susan turned to the young man with a gentle but firm expression. Thank you for your concern, but this is a private matter. She turned back to John. Mr. Miller, I can't explain everything right now, but I promise there's a good reason. Would you trust me on this? John studied her face for a moment. In his years of service, he had learned to read people well. Susan wasn't being difficult or arbitrary. Something in her eyes told him this request was genuine and important. With a small sigh, John nodded. All right, ma'am, I'll move. He carefully stood up, feeling the familiar stiffness in his right knee. The young woman in the middle seat quickly got up to let him out. John retrieved his carry-on from the overhead bin, nodded politely to his rowmates, and followed Susan up the aisle. To his surprise, Susan didn't lead him to another economy seat. Instead, she continued forward, past the dividing curtain and into the first-class cabin. Several passengers watched with curious expressions as the elderly veteran with the slight limp followed the flight attendant toward the front of the plane. Right here, Mr. Miller, Susan said, stopping at seat 2A, a spacious first-class window seat. This will be your seat for today's flight. John looked at her in confusion. There must be some mistake. I didn't pay for first class. Susan smiled, warmly. No mistake, sir. Please make yourself comfortable. Before John could ask further questions, another flight attendant called Susan away to help with final preparations for takeoff. Still bewildered, John stored his bag in the much roomier overhead bin and settled into the plush leather seat. It was certainly more comfortable than his original seat, with ample legroom for his bad knee. As he fastened his seatbelt, John noticed unusual activity near the cockpit. The door was slightly ajar, and he could see someone peering out, seeming to scan the first-class cabin. The person quickly disappeared back inside as the plane began to push back from the gate. John gazed out his new window, watching as the airport slowly moved past. He couldn't help but wonder why he had been moved to first class. In all his years of flying, nothing like this had ever happened before. As the plane taxied toward the runway, John couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen. For now, though, he simply enjoyed the unexpected comfort of his new seat, stretching his bad knee out gratefully as the aircraft prepared for takeoff. John Miller settled into the plush leather first-class seat, still puzzled by the unexpected upgrade. The extra legroom was a welcome relief for his aching knee, but the mystery of why he had been moved bothered him. He wasn't the type of man who expected special treatment, especially not because of his veteran status. As the plane accelerated down the runway and lifted into the morning sky, John gazed out the window at the shrinking Dallas landscape below. The flight attendant, Susan Carter, returned once they reached cruising altitude. "Can I get you something to drink, Mr. Miller?" she asked with a warm smile. "Just water, please," John replied. "And if you don't mind me asking, why was I moved? Up here? There must be some mistake." Susan poured him a glass of water with ice. "No mistake at all, sir. Sometimes we have special situations on flights. I promise everything will make sense soon." Her cryptic answer only deepened John's curiosity, but he nodded politely and accepted the water. Susan moved on to serve other first-class passengers, leaving John to his thoughts. The businessman in the seat across the aisle nodded at John. Nice upgrade, huh? I've been flying this route every month for 3 years and never seen them move someone up for no reason. John shrugged. I'm as surprised as you are. Must be the hat, the businessman said, gesturing to John's USMC veteran cap. Thank you for your service, by the way. My dad was in Vietnam, Army, not Marines. I appreciate that, John said. He never knew quite how to respond to thanks for his service. He hadn't joined the Marines for recognition or praise. He had simply felt it was his duty. John took a sip of his water and thought about the call he'd made to his daughter Lisa before boarding. She was excited about his visit and had planned several activities with the grandkids. His 10-year-old grandson Sam had just joined Little League, and John was looking forward to seeing him play on Saturday. 7-year-old Emma had apparently been practicing a piano piece to perform for her grandfather. The thought of his grandchildren brought a smile to John's face. After Elaine had passed away, they had become his main source of joy. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, opening it to the small family photo taken at Christmas. Lisa stood behind the children, all three smiling in front of a decorated tree. John's thumb brushed over the empty space where Elaine should have been. The seatbelt sign dinged off, bringing John back to the present. Some passengers began to move about the cabin, but John stayed seated, content to rest his knee. Susan passed by again, this time with a hot towel. Here you are, Mr. Miller, she said, placing it on his tray table. Thank you, but you really don't need to fuss over me, John said. Susan lowered her voice. Just following instructions, sir. Before John could ask whose instructions, Susan was called away by another passenger. John wiped his hands with the hot towel, appreciating the small luxury but feeling increasingly curious about the special treatment. About 30 minutes into the flight, John noticed movement near the cockpit. The door opened and the captain emerged. He was a tall man in his mid-40s with short brown hair visible beneath his cap. The 4 gold stripes on his uniform sleeves gleamed under the cabin lights. The captain spoke briefly with a flight attendant, then scanned the first-class cabin. When his eyes landed on John, a strange expression crossed his face, something between recognition and emotion. He straightened his uniform jacket and walked directly toward John's seat. John sat up a bit straighter, wondering if this might finally explain the mysterious upgrade. The captain stopped at his row and extended his hand. Mr. Miller, I'm Captain Peter Collins. I hope you don't mind the seat change. John shook the offered hand, noting the captain's firm grip. Not at all, though I am curious about it. Captain. Collins glanced around at the other passengers, some of whom were watching the interaction with interest. Do you mind if I sit for a moment? He asked, indicating the empty seat beside John. Please do, John said, his curiosity growing by the second. The captain sat down and turned slightly to face John. Up close, John could see lines of fatigue around the man's eyes, the kind that came from years of irregular sleep schedules and responsibility. Mr. Miller, I hope you'll forgive me for the seat change, but when I saw your name on the passenger list, I had to meet you. John's brow furrowed. I'm afraid I don't understand. Have we met before? Captain Collins reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. He handled it carefully, like something precious. We haven't met, but I believe you knew. My brother. He handed the photograph to John. It showed a much younger version of John, maybe in his late 40s, standing next to a young soldier in desert camouflage. They were in front of a military vehicle, the harsh sun of Iraq washing out the background. Both men were dusty and looked tired, but they were smiling. John stared at the photo, memories rushing back. The hot, dry air, the constant vigilance. The bonds formed in moments of danger. The young lieutenant in the photo had been wounded in an ambush outside Baghdad. John had carried him to safety while under enemy fire. Your brother was Ryan Collins? John asked, his voice slightly hoarse with emotion. The lieutenant from the 3rd Infantry? The captain nodded, his eyes glistening, slightly. Yes, sir, Lieutenant Ryan Collins, my younger brother. John handed the photo back carefully. How is he? Is he still with the Army? A shadow passed over Captain Collins's face. Ryan retired as a colonel 5 years ago. He passed away last year. Cancer. I'm very sorry to hear that, John said sincerely. He was a good soldier. He was, the captain agreed. And he never forgot what you did for him. He carried that photo everywhere until the day he died. John looked down at his hands, feeling a complex mix of emotions. I just did what anyone would have done. Captain Collins shook his head. No, sir. Not anyone would have run into open fire to drag a wounded officer to safety. The doctors said he wouldn't have survived another 10 minutes out there. John remembered that day vividly now. His unit had been providing security for a convoy when they were ambushed. Lieutenant Collins had been hit in the leg and shoulder, pinned down behind a disabled vehicle. Without thinking, John had rushed to him, applied a tourniquet, and carried him back to cover. Ryan told us everything, Captain Collins continued. How you talked to him the whole time kept him conscious. How you went back for 2 more wounded men after getting him to safety. John shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had never sought recognition for his actions. It was a long time ago. 20 years, the captain said. But some things stay with you forever. Ryan became a father a few months after he got home from that deployment. His daughter is in college now. She exists because of what you did that day. The weight of those words settled on John. He had never thought much about the ripple effects of his actions that day. He had simply done his duty as he saw it. When I saw your name on the passenger manifest this morning, I couldn't believe it, Captain Collins explained. I checked your details. Marine veteran, right age. When I confirmed your seat assignment and saw you boarding with your USMC cap, I knew it had to be you. So that's why the flight attendant asked me to move, John said. Understanding finally. Dawning. Yes, the captain nodded. I hope you don't mind. I wanted to meet you properly, and I thought the least we could do was offer you a more comfortable seat. A flight attendant appeared at the captain's side. I'm sorry, Captain Collins, but we're experiencing some light turbulence ahead. First, Officer Davis suggests you return to the cockpit. Captain Collins nodded. Thank you, I'll be right there. He turned back to John. I need to get back to work, Mr. Miller, but if you don't mind, I'd like to talk more when I can step away again. I'd like that, John said sincerely. The captain stood and straightened his uniform. Thank you again, Mr. Miller, for everything. He extended his hand once more, and John shook it firmly. As Captain Collins returned to the cockpit, John sat, back in his seat, overwhelmed by the unexpected connection. The photograph had brought back memories he hadn't revisited in years. Lieutenant Ryan Collins. Now he remembered the young officer clearly. Brave, smart, well-liked by his men. John had never known what happened to him after that day. Susan approached with a fresh glass of water. Is everything all right, Mr. Miller? You look like you've seen a ghost. John smiled faintly. In a way I have. Just some old memories. Susan nodded understandingly. The captain told us a little about why you're important to him. It's an honor to have you on our flight, sir. As she moved away, John turned to look out the window at the vast expanse of clouds below. How strange that a simple flight to visit his family had connected him to a piece of his past. He thought about the young lieutenant, now gone, and the daughter who had grown up because of a split-second decision made in the heat of battle 2 decades ago. Life was full of such connections, John reflected. Invisible threads linking people, across time and distance. As the plane continued its journey westward, he wondered what other surprises this unexpected reunion might bring. The plane continued westward, cutting through the sky at 35,000 feet. John Miller watched the clouds drift by below, lost in memories of his time in Iraq. 20 years had passed since that day outside Baghdad, but Captain Collins' photograph had brought it all back with startling clarity. The heat, the dust, the sudden chaos of the ambush, and the wounded lieutenant he had carried to safety. Susan Carter returned to check on him. Can I get you anything else, Mr. Miller? I'm fine, thank you, John replied, then added, Actually, I'd take a coffee if you have it. Cream or sugar? Black is fine, Susan smiled. Coming right up. As she walked away, John noticed other passengers glancing in his direction. Word seemed to be spreading about his connection to the captain. An older woman across the aisle caught his eye and gave him a respectful nod. Susan returned with a steaming cup of coffee in a proper ceramic mug, one of the small luxuries of first class. "Here you are, sir. The captain asked me to tell you. He'll return as soon as he can." "Thank you," John said, taking the mug carefully. For the next hour, John sipped his coffee and tried to read his Western novel, but his mind kept wandering back to Lieutenant Ryan Collins. He remembered the young officer's determined spirit even while badly wounded. "Don't let them get the convoy," Ryan had said through gritted teeth as John dragged him to cover. Even in extreme pain, the lieutenant had been thinking of his mission and his men. The seatbelt sign dinged on briefly as the plane encountered a patch of turbulence. John set his coffee down and secured the belt across his lap. The businessman across the aisle did the same, then leaned toward John. "I couldn't help overhearing earlier," he said. "You saved the captain's brother?" John nodded slightly, uncomfortable with the attention. "A long time ago." "That's incredible," the man said. "No wonder they moved you up here." Before John could respond, the seatbelt sign dinged off and the cockpit door opened again. Captain Collins emerged and made his way back to John's seat. This time he carried a small leather folder. "Sorry about the bumps," the captain said as he sat down beside John again. "Just a bit of unstable air. We should have smooth flying for the rest of the trip." "No problem," John replied. "I've been through worse." Captain Collins smiled. "I'm sure you have." He placed the leather folder on his lap. "I hope you don't mind, but I brought something else to show you." He opened the folder to reveal several more photographs and some documents. The first photo showed a smiling Ryan Collins in a colonel's uniform, standing with his arm around a teenage girl. "This is Ryan with his daughter Kelly about 5 years ago at his retirement ceremony," Captain Collins explained. "She's 20 now, studying nursing at UCLA. John studied the photo with interest. The young lieutenant had aged into a distinguished-looking officer. The resemblance between the brothers was clear, same jawline, same eyes. The girl had her father's smile. "He had a good career then," John said. "Distinguished," Captain Collins confirmed. 2 bronze stars, a Purple Heart from that day you saved him, and a Silver Star later on. He commanded a battalion in Afghanistan and eventually became a strategic advisor at the Pentagon. He showed John another photograph, this one of Ryan in hospital scrubs, holding a newborn baby. "This is the day Kelly was born," Captain Collins said. "Just 4 months after he got home from Iraq. When Ryan woke up in the field hospital after the ambush, the first thing he told the doctors was that he had to live because his wife was pregnant." John felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't known that detail. He hadn't known anything about Lieutenant Collins's life beyond that day in the desert. "Ryan never forgot what you did," Captain Collins continued, turning to another photo. This one showed Ryan at a backyard barbecue, his leg brace visible beneath his shorts. He had 3 surgeries on that leg. Never got full mobility back, but he adapted, made sure the Army kept him even with the disability. John nodded. Many veterans lived with similar reminders of their service. "Did he talk about that day much?" John asked. Captain Collins closed the folder. "All the time. It became part of our family story. He told Kelly from the time she was old enough to understand that she existed because of a brave Marine who risked his life. She grew up hearing about John Miller, the hero who saved her dad." John shifted uncomfortably. "I wasn't the only one there that day. We all did our jobs." "That's almost exactly what Ryan said you'd say if I ever met you," Captain Collins said, with a small laugh. "He said you carried him a 1/4 mile under fire and then claimed it was just part of the job." A flight attendant approached with a message for the captain, who excused himself briefly to speak with her. While he was gone, John tried to process everything he had learned. His actions that day had rippled through time in ways he had never imagined. A colonel's career, a daughter's life, family stories told and retold, all stemming from those desperate minutes outside Baghdad. When Captain Collins returned, he had a more serious expression. "Mr. Miller, I hope this isn't too forward, but I have a request. Would you be willing to speak with my niece Kelly? She's actually meeting me in San Francisco tonight. We're having dinner, and when I realized you were on this flight, I called her right away." John hesitated. He had planned to take a taxi directly to his daughter's house from the airport. Seeing his hesitation, the captain added, "Just a brief meeting, if you're comfortable with it. I know she'd be honored to thank you, in person." John thought about his own grandchildren and how he would feel if someone had saved Lisa's life. "I suppose I could," he agreed. "I'm going to my daughter's place in the city, but I have time." Relief and gratitude spread across Captain Collins's face. "Thank you. It would mean the world to her. And to me." A voice came over the intercom. "Captain Collins, please return to the cockpit for descent preparation." The captain stood. "I need to get back. We'll talk more before landing." As Captain Collins returned to the cockpit, Susan appeared with lunch service. She placed a white tablecloth on John's tray table and set down a plate of grilled chicken with vegetables. Far better than the usual airplane fare. "The captain ordered the special meal for you," she explained. While John ate, he noticed more. Passengers looking his way with curious or admiring glances. The businessman across the aisle leaned over again. "I just heard from one of the flight attendants. You saved the captain's brother in Iraq, under enemy fire?" John nodded reluctantly. "My son is in the army now," the businessman said. "It means a lot to hear stories like yours. Gives me hope that if he ever gets in trouble out there, someone like you will be there for him too." John didn't know how to respond to that, so he simply nodded again. By the time he finished his meal, it seemed most of the first-class cabin had heard some version of the story. An older veteran a few rows ahead gave him a respectful salute, which John acknowledged with a nod. The remainder of the flight passed, quickly. As they began their descent into San Francisco, Captain Collins's voice came over the intercom, making the usual announcements about local time and weather. Then, his tone changed slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I may add a personal note. Today on our flight, we have the honor of flying with a true American hero. 20 years ago in Iraq, retired Marine John Miller saved my brother's life during an enemy ambush. My brother went on to complete a distinguished military career and raise a beautiful daughter because of Mr. Miller's courage. I'd like to ask for your patience as we allow Mr. Miller to deplane first when we arrive at the gate." John felt his face grow warm as spontaneous applause broke out in the first-class cabin. The applause spread to economy as passengers there learned what was happening. John had never sought recognition for his actions, and now he found himself the center of attention on a plane full of strangers. Susan leaned down as she collected his empty coffee cup. "The captain doesn't do that often," she said with a smile. "You must be very special, Mr. Miller." As the plane descended through the clouds toward San Francisco Bay, John thought about the strange turns life could take. He had boarded a routine flight to visit his family and somehow found himself connected to a part of his past he had nearly forgotten. Now he was about to meet the daughter of a man he had saved, a young woman who existed because of a split-second decision made in the chaos of war. The plane touched down smoothly on the runway. As they taxied toward the gate, John wondered what exactly he would say to Kelly Collins. How did you talk to someone whose entire existence was, in some way, connected to your actions? What words could possibly capture the complex emotions of such a meeting? The seatbelt sign dinged off. Captain Collins's voice came over the intercom once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to San Francisco International Airport. Local time is 11:47 a.m. and the temperature is 68 degrees. Please remain seated until Mr. Miller has deplaned. Thank you for your cooperation." The plane came to a complete stop at the gate. John Miller remained in his seat as the seatbelt sign turned off. He felt strangely nervous, like before a mission. The idea of being the first to deplane with everyone watching made him uncomfortable. He had always preferred to work quietly without drawing attention to himself. Susan Carter appeared at his side. "Mr. Miller, we're ready for you to deplane first." John nodded, gathering his small carry-on bag from under the seat. His bad knee protested as he stood, but he ignored the pain. As he stepped into the aisle, the first-class passengers broke into applause again. John nodded politely, his face warm with embarrassment. and made his way toward the exit. Captain Peter Collins stood at the cockpit door, now wearing his uniform cap. He extended his hand to John once more. "Thank you for your patience with all this, Mr. Miller. I know it's a lot to take in." "It's fine," John said, shaking the captain's hand. "Just not used to the spotlight." Captain Collins smiled. "I'll meet you in the terminal after I finish my post-flight duties. It shouldn't take more than 15 minutes. John nodded and continued toward the exit. The flight attendants at the door thanked him warmly as he passed. Susan gave him a special smile and a quiet, "Thank you for everything, sir." Walking up the jet bridge, John's mind raced. He needed to call his daughter Lisa to let her know he would be a bit delayed. He hoped she wouldn't worry when he wasn't on the arriving passengers list right away. As he entered the terminal, John was surprised to see a small group of people waiting. Several wore airline uniforms, and a few appeared to be airport staff. In the center stood a young woman holding a handwritten sign that read, "John Miller, Hero." She looked to be in her early 20s, with light brown hair pulled back in a ponytail. Even from a distance, John could see the resemblance to the photo of Ryan Collins that Captain Peter had shown him. This had to be Kelly Collins. John hesitated for a moment, then continued walking toward the group. As he approached, Kelly's eyes widened with recognition, likely from descriptions her father had given her over the years. She stepped forward, the sign trembling slightly in her hands. "Mr. Miller?" she asked, her voice steady despite the emotion clearly visible on her face. "Yes," John replied simply. Kelly set the sign down on a nearby chair and extended her hand. "I'm Kelly Collins, Ryan Collins' daughter. My Uncle Peter called me from the plane. I hope you don't mind that I came to meet you." John shook her hand. "Not at all." They stood for a moment, both uncertain what to say next. Then Kelly took a deep breath. "Mr. Miller, I've been hearing about you my entire life. My dad told me the story of what you did for him before I was old enough to fully understand it. He always said that without you, I wouldn't exist." John shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the praise but moved by her words. "Your father was a brave soldier. I just did what needed doing that day." Kelly smiled, and John could see Ryan in her expression. "That's exactly what Dad said you would say. He told me you were the most humble hero he'd ever met." One of the airline staff members, a woman in her 50s with a manager's badge, stepped forward. "Mr. Miller, we've arranged a private lounge where you and Ms. Collins can talk while Captain Collins finishes his duties. Would you like to follow me?" John glanced at Kelly, who nodded encouragingly. "That would be fine, thank you," he said. They followed the manager through the terminal to a small VIP lounge. Inside were comfortable chairs, a table with refreshments, and large windows overlooking the runway. The manager showed them in, then discreetly left, closing the door behind her. "Please sit down," Kelly said, gesturing to one of the chairs. "Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee?" "Water would be fine," John said, easing himself into a chair. His knee was bothering him more after the long flight, despite the comfort of first class. Kelly brought 2 bottles of water from a small refrigerator and sat across from John. She seemed to be studying his face, taking in the details of the man she had heard about for so long. "I have so many questions," she admitted. "My dad told me the story of that day so many times, but always from his perspective. I'd love to hear your side of it, if you don't mind talking about it." John took a sip of water, gathering his thoughts. He rarely discussed his combat experiences, even with other veterans. But something about Kelly's earnest request made him want to share this particular story. "We were providing security for a supply convoy," he began slowly. 3 vehicles from my unit, plus the 5 supply trucks. Everything was going smoothly until we reached a narrow stretch of road with buildings on both sides. Perfect spot for an ambush. Kelly leaned forward, listening intently. The first explosion hit the lead vehicle, then small arms fire from multiple positions. "Your father was in the second vehicle. He got out to organize a response when he was hit." John paused, the memories vivid in his mind. Leg and shoulder wounds. Bad ones. He was pinned down behind his disabled vehicle, exposed to fire from at least 2 positions. Dad said you ran to him without hesitation, Kelly said, even though everyone else was taking cover. John nodded. He was in a bad spot, bleeding heavily. I got to him, applied a tourniquet to his leg, and carried him back behind our position. He was conscious the whole time, more worried about his men than himself. He always said you talked to him the whole time, kept him focused. Standard procedure with wounded, John explained. Keep them alert, keep them talking. Your father was strong. He kept saying he had to make it home because his wife was expecting a baby. Kelly's eyes filled with tears. That baby was me. A quiet moment passed between them. After I got your father to safety, our medic took over his care. I went back out for 2 more wounded men. By then, air support had arrived and the attackers were retreating. John took another sip of water. Your father was evacuated by helicopter about 30 minutes later. That was the last time I saw him until today, in those photographs. Kelly wiped away a tear. Dad had 3 surgeries on his leg. He walked with a limp for the rest of his life. But he never complained about it. He said it was a small price to pay. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, worn journal. My dad kept a journal during his recovery. He wrote about that day and about you. After he died last year, I found this among his things. She held it out to John. I'd like you to have it. John looked at the journal, surprised by the offer. That should stay with your family. Kelly shook her head. I've made copies of the important parts. I think he would want you to have this. Please. Reluctantly, John accepted the journal. The cover was soft leather, cracked with age and use. Thank you, he said simply. No, Mr. Miller. Thank you. Kelly's voice was steady, despite her tears. Every birthday, my dad would tell me, today we celebrate not just you, but the brave Marine who made your life possible. He never forgot what you did. Not for a single day. The door to the lounge opened, and Captain Collins entered, now without his uniform jacket. Sorry I'm late, he said, had to file some reports. He looked between John and Kelly. I see you 2 have met. Kelly stood and hugged her uncle. Yes. Mr. Miller was just telling me about that day from his perspective. Captain Collins sat down, completing their small circle. Did you show him the journal? Kelly nodded. He tried to refuse it. The captain smiled. That sounds like the man Ryan described. He turned to John. My brother would absolutely want you to have that. He wrote about you often. Not just about that day, but whenever he faced difficult decisions. He would ask himself, what would that Marine do? You became a kind of moral compass for him. John didn't know how to respond to that. The idea that he had influenced a man he barely knew over decades was difficult to process. Your brother was a good man, John said finally. From what you've told me, he accomplished far more than I ever did. Dad would strongly disagree with that statement, Kelly said. He always said that the truest measure of courage is what you do when there's no time to think, only to act. She looked at John with sincere admiration. By that measure, you showed more courage in those few minutes than most people do in a lifetime. Captain Collins checked his watch. I hate to cut this short, but I have a return flight to Dallas in 2 hours. He looked at John. Do you have plans for dinner tonight? Kelly and I were going to grab a meal before my flight. We'd be honored if you would join us. John thought about his daughter and grandchildren waiting for him. I appreciate the offer, but my daughter is expecting me. I'm here to visit her and my grandkids. Of course, the captain said. Family comes first. We understand completely. Kelly reached into her purse again and pulled out a business card. This has my contact information. If you have time during your visit, even just for coffee, I'd love to talk more. She handed him the card. And if not this trip, maybe another time. I'm in San Francisco for nursing school for at least 2 more years. John accepted the card. I'll try to make time, he said, and found that he meant it. There was something fulfilling about this unexpected connection to his past. Captain Collins stood and extended his hand to John once more. It's been an honor to meet you, Mr. Miller. Truly. John shook his hand firmly. Likewise, Captain. Kelly stepped forward and, after a moment's hesitation, gave John a gentle hug. "Thank you for my father's life," she whispered. "And for mine." After saying goodbye to Captain Collins and Kelly, John Miller stood in the busy terminal, still processing everything that had happened. The worn journal from Lieutenant Ryan Collins felt heavy in his hands. He carefully placed it in his carry-on bag and took out his cell phone to call his daughter Lisa. She answered on the second ring. "Dad, are you here? I've been waiting at the arrivals area." "I'm here," John replied. But something unexpected happened. "I'll tell you all about it when I see you. I'm heading to baggage claim now." "Is everything okay?" Lisa asked, concern in her voice. "Everything's fine," John assured her. "Better than fine, actually. I'll be there in about 15 minutes. John made his way through the terminal toward baggage claim, his mind still filled with images of the young lieutenant he had saved 20 years ago, the captain who had honored him today, and the young woman whose existence was connected to his actions on that distant battlefield. As he walked, several people from his flight nodded or smiled at him in recognition. A young airport employee even stopped him to shake his hand, having heard about the veteran who had been honored on the arriving flight. John's bag was one of the last to appear on the carousel. He grabbed it and headed toward the arrivals area, where Lisa would be waiting. His knee was aching after the long day, but he barely noticed the pain. He spotted Lisa immediately. At 42, she looked so much like her mother Elaine that it sometimes caught John by surprise. She was scanning the crowd anxiously, and her face lit up when she saw him. "Dad!" She hurried over and gave him a warm hug. "What happened?" "The airline called me and said you were being given special assistance or something." John smiled. "It's a long story. I'll tell you on the drive home." They walked to the short-term parking garage where Lisa had left her car. John told her about the flight attendant asking him to move, the unexpected first-class upgrade, and meeting Captain Collins. "So the captain was the brother of a soldier you saved in Iraq?" Lisa asked as they drove out of the airport and onto the highway toward the city. "That's amazing, Dad." "It was 20 years ago," John said. "I never knew what happened to him afterward. Turns out he had a full career in the Army, retired as a colonel." "And you met his daughter too?" Lisa glanced at her father, clearly impressed. John nodded. "Kelly. She's studying nursing at UCLA. She gave me her father's journal." He patted his carry-on bag on the seat beside him. Lisa shook her head in wonder. "Dad, that's incredible. Have you read it yet?" "Not yet," John replied. "I will later." They drove in silence for a few minutes. Then Lisa said, "You know, you never told us much about your time in Iraq. Or any of your deployments, really." John looked out the window at the San Francisco skyline coming into view. "Never seemed important to talk about it. Just did my job like everyone else there." "But you saved that man's life," Lisa pressed gently. "That's more than just doing your job." John shrugged. "It's what any of us would have done." Lisa smiled. "That's exactly what Sam said you'd say when I told him about your Purple Heart." John turned to his daughter in surprise. "You told Sam about that?" "Of course I did," Lisa said. "He had a school project about family heroes last year. He chose you. He was so proud when he learned his grandfather earned a Purple Heart for saving fellow soldiers." John hadn't known about this. He had always been private about his military service, believing it was just a part of his life, not something to boast about. "Sam looks up to you so much, Dad," Lisa continued. "Emma, too. They're both so excited you're here for a whole week." When they arrived at Lisa's house in a quiet San Francisco neighborhood, John was greeted enthusiastically by his grandchildren. 10-year-old Sam rushed out first, followed by 7-year-old Emma. "Grandpa!" they shouted together, almost knocking him over with their hugs. "Easy there," Lisa cautioned. "Grandpa's had a long day." John embraced his grandchildren, feeling the simple joy of family that always grounded him after the complexities of life. "Did you bring us anything?" Emma asked hopefully. John laughed. "Maybe I did, but first let me get settled and then we'll see what might be in my suitcase for 2 good grandkids." Inside the house, while Lisa made coffee and the children helped bring in his bags, John took a moment to sit in the living room. Family photos covered the walls. Lisa's wedding to her husband Dan, who was away on a business trip, the children at various ages, and several of John and Elaine from happier times. Sam came and sat beside his grandfather on the couch. Mom said something special happened on your flight. Were there terrorists? Did you stop them? John chuckled. Nothing like that. Just met someone whose family I helped a long time ago. Sam looked disappointed, clearly hoping for a more exciting story. But, John added, if you're interested, I could tell you about the time your grandmother and I got lost hiking in the mountains, and how we found our way back using just the stars. Sam's eyes widened. Really? You can navigate by stars? Your grandfather can do lots of things he doesn't talk about, Lisa said, entering with a tray of coffee and cookies. Maybe while he's here you can ask him to teach you some of what he knows. After dinner, when the children were doing homework and Lisa was making phone calls for her work, John finally had a quiet moment alone. He took Ryan Collins' journal from his bag and opened it carefully. The first entry was dated shortly after the ambush, written from a hospital bed in Germany. John read slowly, taking in the words of the man he had saved. The doctors say I'm lucky to be alive, Ryan had written. They told me the Marine who pulled me out, Staff Sergeant Miller, applied the tourniquet perfectly. Without it, I would have bled out in minutes. I keep thinking about him talking to me, keeping me conscious. Stay with me, Lieutenant. Your men need you. Your baby needs you. I didn't even know him, but he risked everything for me. How do you thank someone for your life? John turned the pages, reading entries from Ryan's recovery, his return to duty, his promotion to captain, and later, to major. There were passages about Kelly's birth, her first steps, her first day of school. Throughout the journal, Ryan returned to the theme of gratitude for the second chance he had been given. An entry from Kelly's 10th birthday caught John's attention. Told Kelly the story again today about the Marine who saved me. She asked if heroes wear capes like in her comic books. I explained that real heroes often look like ordinary people. They wear uniforms, or work clothes, or sometimes just jeans and t-shirts. But what makes them heroes is that they run toward a danger when everyone else runs away. John Miller was that kind of hero. John closed the journal, deeply moved. He had never thought of himself as a hero. He had simply done what needed to be done in a dangerous moment. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Lisa peered in. Everything okay, Dad? John nodded. Just reading something. Lisa came in and sat beside him. The journal from that soldier? Yes. John handed it to her. His name was Ryan Collins. He kept this for years after I helped him. Lisa flipped through a few pages carefully, then looked up at her father with new understanding. Dad, this is amazing. He wrote about you so many times. John shrugged. He gave me too much credit. Or maybe you don't give yourself enough, Lisa suggested gently. The next morning, while Lisa was getting the children ready for school, John's phone rang. The number wasn't familiar, but the San Francisco area code made him answer. Mr. Miller, it's Kelly Collins. Her voice sounded hesitant. I hope it's not too early to call. Not at all, John assured her. I've been up for hours, old habits. I understand, Kelly said. My dad was the same way. She paused. I was wondering if you'd had a chance to look at his journal. I read some of it last night, John admitted. Your father was a good man. The best, Kelly agreed. Mr. Miller, I know you're here to visit your family, but I was hoping I might introduce you to some people before you leave. My dad's friends from the Army have a monthly meeting here in the city. Several of them served with him in Iraq and Afghanistan. When I told them about meeting you, they asked if you might join them. John hesitated. He had never been one for military reunions or veterans groups. As if sensing his reluctance, Kelly added, just for coffee, maybe. They'd be honored to meet the man my dad spoke about so often. Before John could respond, Sam came bounding into the room, already dressed for school. Grandpa, are you coming to my baseball game on Saturday? I'm pitching. Wouldn't miss it, John assured him, then spoke into the phone again. Kelly, I need to go. My grandson is heading to school. But yes, I'd be willing to meet your father's friends, maybe later in the week. That would be wonderful, Kelly said, the relief evident in her voice. I'll text you the details. And Mr. Miller, thank you again for everything. After hanging up, John sat for a moment reflecting on how strangely life could unfold. A routine flight had connected him to a part of his past he had nearly forgotten, and now new connections were forming, bridging decades and generations. Emma appeared in the doorway, her backpack ready. Grandpa, can you walk us to the bus stop? Mom said it's okay if you want to. John smiled and stood up, his knee protesting slightly. I'd like that very much. As they walked to the bus stop, Sam on one side and Emma on the other, each holding one of his hands, John felt a deep sense of contentment. The journal, the unexpected connections, the reminder of lives touched and saved.